Welcome to another episode of the Federal Newswire Lunch Hour Podcast with your host, Andrew Langer.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to this special episode of the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour Podcast, our ongoing series on the REINS Act in focus. Joining us today, very excited to have him on. His name is Stewart Whitson. He's a political and economic scholar, has done a lot of work in the public policy sphere. Right now, he is not affiliated with his normal organization because he's running for Congress. We can't get into those specifics here, but we appreciate the policy work that he has done and is doing. We'll get a little bit more into that, I suppose. But let's start here, Stewart, as someone who is taking the plunge. Tell us all why the REINS Act is important.
Well, right now in DC, we don't have a revenue problem. We have a spending problem. And most of that spending, contrary to what most folks would think, isn't going on with Congress. It's actually going on at the executive level with the executive branch and executive agencies. And so if you go back to the Biden administration, Biden spent more than $1.7 trillion through executive fiat.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you want to rein in reckless spending, you've got to go after, the executive branch spending. And so that's where the REINS Act comes into play.
It's funny because we were talking with Matthew Jensen from AFPI about this just the other day, and he is doing some really exciting work on making that expression of just how the regulatory state grows budgetary spending. And it is, you're absolutely right. It is massive. And that's the interesting thing, right? And you've seen this happen. The what we call the major rules that has changed over time. But you're out there talking to average, everyday people. How does this play in? How do these things affect Americans in their everyday lives?
Well, I mean, the thing about regulations is not only are you wasting taxpayer money on certain regulations, but you're also wasting taxpayers' time,
right,
and energy. Because every time you create a new regulation, there's a host of work that goes behind that. And so our organization did studies, and we saw the average family pays $16,000 a year because of increased regulations. Some other facts I have: small businesses and the average taxpayer spend 10.5 billion hours a year just dealing with regulatory compliance paperwork. So again, not only is it a big cost, but it's a huge burden. And anyone that has a small business or anyone who's filed their own taxes knows that.
So yeah, let's talk about that, because I have long surmised, we do spend, and I think rightly so, spend a lot of time talking about regulations in terms of their economic cost. As you point out, there are huge time burdens. This idea, time is the fire in which we all burn, as they said in Star Trek Generations, because that's where I go. That's my wheelhouse. But time is a finite resource. It's the only thing we can't make more of here. What would you think? I mean, we're talking about the REINS Act and where it needs to go, but what would you think about the idea of a no net loss of time pledge or mandate? The idea that as agencies add burden, maybe we ought to mandate that they take burden off somewhere else. Your thoughts on this?
Well, yeah, I think you're spot on. And I think that's something President Trump did similar to that with a 2-for-1 policy in his first administration. And then now he has the 10-for-1 policy. And
Right.
What is that in a quick nutshell? It just basically, it's an order from the executive telling the executive branch agencies, hey, anytime you create a new costly rule, you need to get rid of 10 other costly rules that are already on the books that do away with that have that similar cost. You need to, flatten that out. So I feel like that's a huge thing that would be helpful. The other key too, besides just the wasteful spending, besides all the time, is also the policy implications.
Yeah.
And so right now, it is really hard to pass new laws and new policies through Congress. But guess what? That can be a good thing, right?
Right.
You pass a new policy that's going to impact the lives of millions of people. You want there to be a lot of debate, and you want that not to be an easy thing to happen. And so what's happening is the executive branch is using executive power to push forward policies that impact the lives of millions of people across the country with the mere stroke of a pen.
Right.
And you look back to the Biden administration, what were like three of the big ones that come to mind? You have the student loan bailout, right?
Oh, yeah.
$1 trillion over 10 years with the stroke of a pen. You've got the unilateral increase of food stamps, $250 billion over 10 years. Medicaid eligibility rule, so making it really hard for states to kick people off Medicaid who the law doesn't allow. So illegal aliens, people that are, claiming benefits in multiple states, that alone was 225 billion over 10 years. And so what do those all have in common? They were all done through an executive order, through
Right.
executive guidance. And so a REINS Act would stop that. Because what it would say is anytime you want to do something like that that has $100 million or more cost, then you have to go to Congress and get it approved, pre-approved before it can go into effect. And so
Right.
essentially having a REINS Act would stop all that.
Yeah, that's just it. It's this issue of getting at the big things, and we've spent a lot of time talking about the smaller rules, the myriad rules that add up to these things. And we just had a conversation with Wayne Cruz from the Competitive Enterprise Institute about this, and gone back because this issue of measuring costs, I mean, that went out the window with the Biden administration. They literally created a new set of guidelines, again with a stroke of a pen,
Mhm.
that fundamentally changed the way we assess the costs and the benefits. Uh, as Wayne said, they didn't care about costs. They still don't care about costs.
Mhm.
And they vastly overstate the benefits here. But really, we're talking about the costs here because even if you have the most well-intentioned policies, reality eventually kicks in, doesn't it? Especially if it really doesn't solve these problems. Talk about that. Talk about the regulatory state, but also talk about spending and how we can't go on forever with this.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is kind of going to the Doge effort,
Right?
not to go off track, but I feel like
No.
Americans have always understood very well that the federal government is inclined to waste money. But never had they seen the scope of the problem or the type of spending that the money's going on. $32,000 for a transgender comic book in Peru.
Yeah.
It just shows you that not only are federal agencies and unelected bureaucrats embedded in those agencies throwing the taxpayers' money down the drain, but they're actually using it on harmful programs.
Yeah.
These are programs that could actually like hurt other people in other countries. And so I think that was eye-opening. And so people realize spending isn't, again, just about losing money. It's also about advancing
Right.
policy that actually hurts the country.
And ultimately, I know we're not going to talk about the specific organization, but ultimately what this all means is the REINS Act and other kinds of tools, it's all about accountability, isn't it? Right. And talk about what that accountability means to you. Where do we need to go with making the federal government more accountable?
Well, I think number one is it shouldn't be it. We need to make it a little bit harder to spend money.
Sure.
The other thing is the REINS Act, as it would pass through the reconciliation process, could actually be tweaked in a way that it serves as a kind of ratcheting effect.
Mm,
What do I mean by that is, and you can craft the REINS Act in a way that only those costly rules that would increase costs by 100 million or more have to get pre-approved, but any new rules or regulations that reduce costs by 100 million or more do not.
mm,
What that would mean is over time, you could do away with costly regulations and it would have a ratcheting effect that
sure.
would squeeze down spending. And so I think that's huge. But again, like you said, so besides accountability, it's also transparency.
Yeah.
So if the Biden administration, for instance, is signing, a letter or guidance in a dark room somewhere,
Right.
spending billions of taxpayer dollars, things we didn't find out until the next administration came into place, that's a problem. And so if you have the REINS Act, they have to go to Congress, they have to debate. And what's going to happen? When they're debating, the Americans are going to find out about what's going on. And so that's huge. I think another thing too is it forces politicians to make hard political
Right.
decisions. And so it's easy for some, especially on, not to get too political, but
Please.
but on the left, if they want to push forward some policy, they can just kind of punt that to the executive branch and let them, pass it through executive fiat. So they don't have to, suffer the consequences of making that vote. So I think that's another thing. It brings accountability. People can see what members of Congress are voting for, and then they can be held accountable at the polls when the time's right.
Well, let's flip it on its head for a second, because I think you raise an interesting point about this. Because you have folks on the left who are rightly and should be concerned about expansive executive branch authority doing things by fiat that they don't like, this so-called authoritarianism that I think they tend to miss it when it's happening with folks they like. But at the very least, these kinds of efforts, they should be in favor of dealing with the issue of expansive executive branch authority, make the case for them as to why they should be supporting something like the REINS Act.
Well, I think I mean, the thing is, the REINS Act is agnostic. It
Right.
doesn't say, hey, only expensive conservative policies have to get pre-approved, or only expensive progressive policies or left-wing policies have to be approved. It says all of them have to be approved. And so I feel like for a lot, and there are a lot of Democrats in Congress, I think, who would see the merit to that. They may not say it outside, but I think behind closed doors, they would see the merit, and they should. That is a good, healthy thing to make big issues have to come to Congress and get pre-approved. So yeah, I think.
No, it's important stuff. So as we're looking at these things, I mean, where do you see it going? Obviously, you've made some important suggestions on the tweaking here. I mean, ultimately, where do you want to see this accountability? How much ratcheting down do you want to see?
Well, I mean, I think we need it across the board. I mean, I
Yeah,
think there's so the REINS Act is not the only thing that
right.
will be going on. I think there's also
Agree. It's not a silver bullet.
yeah, a key component, and so it kind of works in tandem with all the other efforts that President Trump is doing to kind of look at the federal government, consolidate and reorganize units where it makes sense. If there's multiple agencies across federal government that are doing the same mission, that's not cost effective. And so that doesn't mean the people are necessarily bad in those
No,
groups. It just means that, hey, you are a great person. We would like to move you over to this other unit
right,
where your skills can be put to work and help keep the American people safe. We don't need this anymore. And so as all that's going on, once that gets set, if all that's done through executive action, then guess what? It can be undone by a
right.
future president through executive action. And so the president needs to get all that done, which he's doing, and then Congress needs to come in, pass the REINS Act, and then make it, give it some stability.
Well, Stuart, listen, I really appreciate you coming on. You have any final thoughts on this vein before we let you go?
No, I think, there's a lot of arguments going on right now about, whether we have enough cost savings in the one big beautiful bill, whether there's too much going on in the one big beautiful bill.
Right,
But you cannot overstate the amount of savings, not just in money, but in people's time that would come from the REINS Act. It is hands down the most powerful provision that we'll see in the one
sure.
big beautiful bill. And guess what? It's also the one provision that everyone is in agreement on. So all Republicans in the Senate voted in favor of the amendment that Senator Lee introduced.
Yeah,
House version had this. There's strong support across. So this could be the unifying provision that when the bill comes back from the Senate to the House, it could be the provision that gets it across the finish line because it's so powerful and so important to so many people.
I think that's a good case to be made. We are at a very unique moment in history. I would say for the last 8, 9 years, I've been waiting for sort of this moment for some real sweeping regulatory reform. We have it. Stewart Whitson, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me on.
Well, this has been yet another episode of our special series from the Federal Newswire's Lunch Hour podcast, REINS Act in Focus. I'm Andrew Langer, your host. Enjoy the rest of your lunch.